My 8-year-old granddaughter whispered that her parents were planning to take my money after the party that day. The words hit me like a thunderclap, completely shattering my belief in the love of my family. As a grandfather who had always trusted and supported them, I left the party early, hiding my shock behind a mask of fatigue. What happened next was a clever plot that would show them the true meaning of betrayal. I would beat them at my own game, and it would be a day they would never forget. I know what you're thinking, Dad, but hear me out. Harry's voice, raspy and strained, cut through the quiet of my Saturday morning. I almost dropped my coffee mug. A 7 a.m. call from Harry was out of character for him, especially with that nervous tremor in his voice. I had heard that exact tone when he was a teenager after he wrecked my truck. "What's wrong, son?" I asked, settling back into my kitchen chair. I watched the steam rise from my coffee while the morning light streamed through the window and lit up the kitchen. He rambled about how he and Mary both really wanted me to come to Alexa's party. The words came out in a rush, as if he had practiced them but couldn't get the timing right. A cold feeling settled over me. Why did they suddenly need to convince me to see my granddaughter? I reminded him that I had never missed any of Alexa's birthdays. He quickly tried to correct himself. I heard what sounded like Mary's voice, sharp and urgent, in the background. Harry said Mary had been planning this party for weeks and had specifically asked him to call and make sure I would be there. I slowly stirred my coffee, watching the cream swirl into little hurricanes. It was strange to me that Mary, who usually treated my presence as a hassle, would specifically ask for me to be there. I tried to sound casual and mentioned that was a very kind gesture of her. Harry agreed with a forced, unnatural laugh, and then suggested I come a little early, maybe at 1:30, because they wanted to talk about family stuff. I was suspicious of this family stuff they wanted to talk about. In the 3 years since Ellen had passed, we had never needed special conversations to discuss family matters. When I asked what kind of things they wanted to talk about, Harry said it was about future things and planning. He said Mary had some ideas about how we could all be more involved with each other. As I pressed the phone to my ear, I walked to the window and watched my neighbor, Dorothy Henderson, watering her flower boxes. I had to contain my frustration. The same Mary who had spent Christmas dinner last year, checking her phone every 5 minutes, now had ideas about family involvement. I kept my voice steady, but my businessman's instincts were on high alert. I had spent 30 years working in a job that trained me to spot when someone was selling something they didn't even believe in themselves. I glanced at the refrigerator where Alexa's latest drawing was hanging. It was a crooked house with stick figures labeled Grandpa, Daddy, Mommy, and me in purple crayon. That little girl was the brightest part of my life since Ellen passed away. Of course, I told him I would be there early. I wouldn't miss Alexa's special day for anything. After I agreed to come early, Harry's voice dropped to a whisper, and he told me to keep an open mind about what they wanted to talk about. He told me it was all about making sure that everyone was taken care of. Before I could ask what he meant by that, he hung up the phone. I stared at the phone for a long moment before setting it down on the counter next to my newspaper. Something just didn't feel right. Harry's voice had that same guilty undertone I remembered from when he was 8 and had stolen money from Ellen's purse to buy candy. But this felt bigger than a simple childhood mistake. I poured myself another cup of coffee and tried to shake the uneasy feeling. I tried to tell myself that maybe Mary genuinely wanted to improve our family relationships and that I was simply overthinking a simple invitation. But as I sat down with my coffee again, I couldn't stop thinking about the phrase, making sure everyone's taken care of. In my experience, when people start using that kind of language, they're usually just talking about taking care of themselves. I looked at Alexa's drawing on the refrigerator again and smiled despite my concerns. Whatever Harry and Mary had planned to discuss, it could wait until after I celebrated my granddaughter's 8th birthday. Some things were more important than adult problems, but I still made a mental note to listen carefully to what they had to say. About 20 minutes later, I found myself in my bedroom closet, staring at the shirts Ellen would never see me wear again. The blue Oxford shirt brought me back to her funeral, to the time when Mary had whispered about all the space she had while we were burying my wife. Even then, I remember a calculating undertone in her voice. I pulled the shirt from its hanger and looked at my reflection in the mirror. I realized that I had given them over $70,000 in the last 3 years to cover their mortgage payments, car loans, and Alexa's private school tuition. Ellen would have called it excessive, but she would have understood that Alexa deserved a better life than her parents could provide on their own. As I got dressed, I felt my wallet heavy in my back pocket. I had 3 credit cards maxed out for Harry's so-called emergencies, like the urgent transmission repair that turned into a full engine rebuild. There was also Mary's temporary need for grocery money that had become a monthly expectation. Each time they asked, Harry would give me a shame-faced explanation, and Mary would express her perfectly timed gratitude. As I walked into the kitchen to grab my keys, I passed the refrigerator and the drawing of our last fishing trip, which hung next to my grocery list. There were 2 stick figures next to a blue crayon lake, and both were smiling. Written underneath it in purple marker were the words, "Best day ever, Grandpa." Mary's recent suggestion suddenly hit me with new clarity. Just 3 weeks ago, she had been standing in this very spot when she had looked around my kitchen and mentioned that she thought my house was getting too big for me. She told me that there were lovely assisted living communities where I wouldn't have to worry about maintenance anymore. Harry had quickly changed the subject to Alexa's softball season, but I had noticed Mary's eyes lingering on my expensive granite countertops and the appliances that Ellen and I had chosen together. It was the same calculating look she had worn at the funeral. I grabbed my car keys from the counter, remembering Ellen's last coherent words. She had told me to promise to always take care of Alexa, but to also watch Harry carefully. She had warned me that he was weak, and that weak people make dangerous choices when someone strong is whispering in their ear. At the time, I thought she was talking about his drinking buddies or his get-rich-quick schemes. Now, I wondered if Ellen had seen something in Mary that I had missed all this time. I thought about how Mary would always begin every conversation about money by talking about Alexa's needs, which always made me feel selfish for even thinking about questioning their expenses. The garage door opener hummed as the morning light streamed across my Mercedes. Ellen's car was still in its spot, covered and pristine. I had kept making payments on it for months after she passed away because I was unable to admit that she was really gone. Maybe they were counting on my inability to say no when it came to my family. I was a grandfather who would rather pay than disappoint and who would rather trust than investigate. But my 40 years of experience in construction had taught me to check the foundations before building anything important. As I slowly backed out of the driveway, I watched my house get smaller in the rearview mirror. By that night, after whatever conversation Harry and Mary had planned, I suspected my whole world would look different. But for now, I needed to buy my granddaughter a birthday present, something special, maybe the last gift I would give her before everything changed. Northtown Mall was buzzing with Saturday morning energy as I parked near the main entrance. At 8:15 a.m., families were already pouring into the toy stores. The timing was perfect for me to get Alexa's gifts. The Lego architecture section caught my eye immediately. Alexa had been fascinated with buildings since her school field trip to the Space Needle last month. I saw the Statue of Liberty set. It looked challenging enough for her growing skills, but not so overwhelming that she would get frustrated with it. At $180, it seemed like a reasonable price for something that would occupy her for weeks. The young clerk who rang up my purchase told me that his daughter loved the series and asked me if I wanted gift wrapping. I told him that it was for my granddaughter's 8th birthday. My next stop was sporting goods. Alexa had also mentioned wanting a real bicycle, not the tiny pink thing she had already outgrown. The Trek model in the window looked perfect for her, with its lightweight frame and handbrakes that she could manage. The reflective strips for safety were a bonus. It cost $320, but I knew her delighted face would be worth every penny. I checked my watch as I loaded the bicycle box into my SUV. It was 9:10 a.m., so I had plenty of time for one more stop. My neighbor of 15 years, Dorothy Henderson, appeared beside my car, clutching a shopping bag from the bookstore. She looked genuinely pleased to see me, and her silver hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour. I told her good morning and asked if she was starting her weekend shopping early. She replied that she liked to beat the crowds, and then mentioned that she had seen Harry last week and that he had mentioned Alexa's party. I was curious and asked her where she had run into him. She said it was downtown on Tuesday morning and that he was with Mary. They were coming out of First National Bank with a large stack of papers, and she had joked that they looked very serious and official, probably refinancing something the way young people do these days. I felt a vague sense of unease as she bustled away toward the bookstore. My mind was now connecting the pieces. Banking business on Tuesday and a nervous phone call on Saturday. The timing felt oddly coincidental. I tried to shake off the feeling and headed toward the florist shop near the mall's east entrance. Mary had always appreciated flowers, and I thought a bouquet of white roses would be a thoughtful gesture for the hostess of the party. The middle-aged florist with dirt under her fingernails expertly wrapped a dozen long-stemmed roses in silver paper. She told me that they were beautiful and asked if it was for a special occasion. I told her that they were for my granddaughter's birthday party, but that they were for her mother. The florist said that was thoughtful and that Mary would love them. The flowers cost $28 and would wilt in a week, but I knew that the gesture would be worth it for a pleased expression from Mary. These small gestures were important for maintaining family harmony, especially when there were underlying tensions. By 9:30 a.m., my SUV was filled with packages for Alexa's birthday that had cost me nearly $600. I had picked out the Lego set, the bicycle, the roses, and a card, with only Alexa's happiness in mind. Spoiling my grandchildren shamelessly and enjoying every moment of it was simply what grandfathers did. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about what Dorothy had told me about Harry and Mary at the bank with papers and serious expressions. I tried to convince myself that there were any number of legitimate reasons for them to be at the bank, but I couldn't quite shake the uneasy feeling. After wrapping Alexa's gifts and grabbing a quick lunch, I arrived at Harry and Mary's house right at 2 o'clock. The front door opened before I could even ring the doorbell, and Mary was there, almost singing my name. She opened her arms wide and told me that I looked absolutely wonderful. Her enthusiasm felt completely out of place. Mary usually greeted me with a polite smile and a quick hug before disappearing into the kitchen to prepare for guests. Today, she touched my arm twice, and her eyes were bright with a newfound energy I had never seen her direct at me before. I thanked Mary and told her the party looked lovely as I stepped inside, carrying the wrapped bicycle box and the gift bag with the Lego set inside. The party was far more elaborate than previous birthday celebrations, with colorful streamers and clusters of balloons everywhere. Harry appeared from the living room and announced that I was there. His voice carried across the house like a carnival barker. He told me to come and meet Mike Davidson from work and introduced me as his amazing father. Harry's conversations about me with his co-workers usually centered on my old-fashioned business methods, but today he clapped my shoulder with theatrical enthusiasm and laughed loudly in the decorated hallway. The living room was buzzing with familiar faces. The Johnsons from next door chatted near the fireplace, and Mrs. Smith sat observing everything with sharp eyes. Carlos and Elena Martinez were helping their son, Tommy, arrange party games on the coffee table. Then, Alexa ran toward me, her genuine smile cutting through the artificial atmosphere like sunlight. She wrapped her arms around my waist, and for a moment, the world felt normal again. I told her happy birthday and handed her the gift bag. I told her to open that one first, then the big surprise. She carefully unwrapped the Lego set, and her eyes widened when she saw the Statue of Liberty on the box. But as she looked up to thank me, a shadow of sadness flickered across her face. Mary quickly approached and told Alexa to properly thank her generous grandfather. Alexa thanked me, and her voice carried genuine appreciation mixed with a sense of guilt and worry. It pained me to hear her sound so burdened during her own birthday party. Harry led me toward the kitchen, where Mike Davidson was nursing a beer and making small talk about car sales. Harry kept interrupting the conversation with unnecessary compliments about my business wisdom and family leadership. He announced to Mike that I knew everything about building successful relationships and that I had taught him so much about trust and family loyalty. Those were strange topics for a casual party conversation, especially delivered with Harry's current frantic intensity. Mike simply nodded politely, looking uncomfortable with Harry's excessive praise of his own father. Mary reappeared with a plate of appetizers and positioned herself between me and the other guests. She told me I simply had to try the canapés because she had made them especially for my sophisticated tastes. Mary had never paid attention to my food preferences before. Now she hovered beside me, refilling my wine glass every few minutes and asking about my comfort level. From across the room, I watched Alexa opening cards from her school friends. Her movements seemed mechanical and distant. When Tommy Martinez asked about her new Lego set, she smiled politely and nodded, but her responses lacked the genuine excitement I had expected. Mrs. Smith sat beside me on the couch and observed that Alexa was growing up so fast. She told me that she was a very thoughtful child and had asked her the previous week if grandparents and parents ever disagree about important decisions. My wine glass paused halfway to my lips. When I asked Mrs. Smith what she told Alexa, she said that families work through their differences with love and honesty. Mrs. Smith studied Alexa with concerned eyes. Harry and Mary exchanged a quick glance. I realized they had been doing that all afternoon. Brief eye contact, subtle nods, and perfectly timed interruptions when conversations approached certain topics. The afternoon dragged on with a forced sense of cheerfulness and careful choreography. Every smile felt calculated, every laugh was slightly too loud, and every gesture of affection seemed performed for an audience. Alexa's behavior toward me was the only thing that felt real, though it was still overshadowed by whatever burden she was carrying. As the party came to an end and guests began to leave, Harry made a casual gesture to get my attention. He told me to stick around after everyone left because they were looking forward to the family chat they had mentioned. The false cheerfulness was now weighing on me like humidity before a storm. I politely excused myself to go to the bathroom. Mary immediately offered me directions I didn't need, and her concern felt rehearsed. As I walked away from the noise of the party, I noticed Alexa watching me from beside the gift table. Her expression was a mix of worry and determination, and it made me pause. When I reached the hallway, I heard small footsteps following me. Alexa's voice was a barely audible whisper. I turned to find her looking back toward the living room to make sure we were alone. The birthday girl, who should have been filled with excitement, looked as though she was carrying the weight of the world on her 8-year-old shoulders. I knelt down to her eye level and told her she looked troubled. She bit her lower lip, a gesture that painfully reminded me of her grandmother during difficult conversations. She told me she had to tell me something important about her mom and dad. My chest tightened. I asked her what it was. She told me that they were planning to take my money that night. The words rushed out as if she had been practicing them. She said that she had heard them talking last night when she was supposed to be sleeping. The hallway seemed to tilt slightly as I gripped the doorframe to steady myself. I tried to keep my expression calm for her sake as I asked her what she had heard. She said her mom told her dad that I had too much money for an old man living alone, and that they were going to fix that problem that night. She told me that her dad seemed scared, but her mom said that the papers from the bank would make everything legal. The papers from the bank. Dorothy Henderson's mention of them on Tuesday suddenly made terrible sense, and my business instincts, which had been dormant for years, came back to life with incredible clarity. I asked her gently if they had said anything else, though my mind was racing with implications I hoped an 8-year-old couldn't understand. She said her dad kept asking what would happen if I found out, and her mom would tell him it would be too late by then. Tears welled in her eyes as she told me she didn't want them to take my money. I pulled her into a fierce hug, feeling her small body trembling against mine. It was heartbreaking to see Ellen's granddaughter carrying secrets that no child should ever have to bear. The betrayal cut even deeper, knowing they had planned this where an innocent child could hear it. I whispered into her hair and told her she had done the right thing by telling me, but that we needed to keep this a secret between us for now. She nodded against my shoulder when I asked her if she understood, and I then asked if she was going to stop them. I told her I would handle everything, and then I held her at arm's length to make sure she could see the certainty in my eyes. I asked her if she could be brave for me and act normal for the rest of the party. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand and told me that she thought she could. She asked me if I would still love her if her parents got mad. The question hit me like a physical blow. I told Alexa that nothing her parents did could ever change how much I loved her. Nothing. She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile I had seen from her all afternoon. We held hands as we walked back toward the sounds of the party, but after those few whispered minutes, everything had changed. The son I had raised, the daughter-in-law I had supported, and the family I had trusted with my heart were now viewed through the lens of betrayal. As we rejoined the celebration, my eyes met Harry's from across the room. He smiled and waved with the same forced enthusiasm that had confused me earlier. Now, I understood exactly what that performance was designed to accomplish. Going back to the party felt like walking onto a stage where everyone else had forgotten their lines. I settled back into conversations with the ease that 40 years of business negotiations had taught me. Mrs. Smith was talking about her garden when I noticed Harry checking his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. Mary immediately appeared beside him, and I knew that their brief eye contact was not a coincidence. I realized they were managing me and trying to ensure I stayed comfortable, engaged, and most importantly, present for whatever they had planned after the guests left. Mary touched my arm with feigned concern and told me I looked a bit pale and asked if I was feeling all right. Learning that your family plans to steal your life's work would do that to a person, I thought, but I managed a tired smile and told her I just had a slight headache but that I was fine. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, and I could read the relief mixed with calculation. She knew that a tired, slightly unwell grandfather would be easier to manipulate than an alert one. For the next hour, I played my part perfectly. I was the generous family patriarch, the aging man who was perhaps not quite as sharp as he once was. I accepted their attention, praised their hospitality, and observed their increasingly obvious coordination as if it were a chess game. Harry kept steering the conversations away from financial topics. Whenever guests mentioned the economy or retirement planning, Mary redirected the discussions to my house, my health, or my future living arrangements. They were managing the information flow and making sure nothing conflicted with the narrative they had constructed for that night's important family discussion. Around 5:30 p.m., as afternoon shadows began to lengthen, I announced my intention to leave. I told them my headache wasn't improving and that I should head home early. The effect on them was immediate. They exchanged a look of genuine alarm. Harry moved to block my path and told me to wait. He reminded me that I had promised to stay after everyone left. I maintained my persona as a weary grandfather and told them that perhaps we could do it another time because I really needed to rest. Mary stepped closer, her voice taking on an urgent tone, and she told me that they had something special planned for that night, something they had been preparing for weeks. The bank visit Dorothy Henderson had witnessed, the legal documents, and the plans that required my presence and cooperation. I could see the desperation creeping into their performance as their carefully orchestrated timeline threatened to collapse. I gently replied that I was sure it could wait until tomorrow and that family isn't going anywhere. Harry's face flushed as he told me that there were some time-sensitive financial matters they needed to discuss. The words "financial matters that can't wait" echoed in my head as I filed the comment away with all the other information I had gathered that afternoon. I promised him we could talk tomorrow and then turned toward Alexa, who had been watching our exchange with worried eyes. I knelt down to her level and pulled her into what might be our last innocent embrace before everything changed. I told her thank you for the wonderful birthday party. She hugged me tightly and said thank you for my presence and that she loved me so much. I whispered back that I loved her too, more than she would ever know, and that everything would be okay. Harry's hand felt heavy on my shoulder as I stood up. He asked me to just give them an hour to discuss the important family decisions. I looked into my son's eyes and saw not the boy I had raised, but a desperate man whose greed had taken over whatever love remained. The realization was more painful than I had expected, but I told him again that I needed to go home. As I walked to my car, they watched me from the doorway. Mary was whispering urgently in Harry's ear, and both of them were radiating frustrated tension. I finally felt the weight of my performance lift from my shoulders. Alone in my Mercedes, I sat for a moment in their driveway and processed the magnitude of what had just happened. My family had planned to rob me that night with legal documents and careful preparation. I started the engine and pulled away from the house where I had celebrated what might be my last normal family gathering. The silence in my own house felt different now, no longer peaceful, but full of a new purpose. I walked directly to my home office, the same room where I had built my construction business. 40 years of important documents were in a wall safe behind Ellen's portrait. I spun the combination lock from memory. The combination was 1959, Ellen's birthday. I thought it was ironic that her memory would help me protect what we had built together. The documents told a story I had been too trusting to read properly. The bank statements revealed a pattern of financial requests that had escalated from hundreds to thousands over 3 years. My investment portfolios were worth far more than Harry and Mary had realized. The property deeds for my rental properties they didn't know existed, and most importantly, the records of every payment I had made to support their lifestyle. There were 247 individual transactions that I had documented with the same methodical precision that had made my business successful. Each payment was for something that seemed reasonable at the time, like mortgage payments, car repairs, medical bills, or private school tuition for Alexa. Sitting at my desk with Ellen's photo watching from the bookshelf, I finally saw the manipulation clearly. The escalating requests were conditioning me to say yes to increasingly larger amounts. Mary's suggestions about assisted living weren't out of concern for my welfare. They were reconnaissance for that night's planned theft. I said aloud to Ellen's photograph that they had been planning this for months. My phone sat silent on the desk. Harry and Mary were likely scrambling to figure out what to do now that their plan had been disrupted. The thought gave me grim satisfaction. I opened my business card file and found James Miller's personal number. He was the vice president of First National Bank, and we had a friendship and professional relationship that spanned 20 years. James would remember the careful, detail-oriented contractor who had never missed a payment or broken a promise. More importantly, he would understand exactly what legal documents obtained under false pretenses meant. The clock showed 9:30 p.m., too late for a business call, but I made a note to call him first thing in the morning to understand what papers Harry and Mary had obtained and how I could neutralize their legal effectiveness. Next, I reviewed my will and trust documents. They were standard arrangements that left everything to Harry, with provisions for Alexa's education and future, but they had been written when I still believed my son had integrity and loved his family rather than simply being greedy for my money. Those documents would need immediate revision. Catherine Davis, who had notarized most of my legal paperwork over the years, was discreet and unconnected to any bank where Harry and Mary might have allies. I made a note to call her in the morning as well. I spread the investment statements across my desk like battle plans and calculated my actual net worth for the first time in years. I had $3 million in liquid assets, plus 3 rental properties and my house with no mortgage. It was far more than Harry and Mary had suspected, and certainly more than they could steal in one night. But this wasn't about money. This was about justice for an 8-year-old girl whose parents were willing to traumatize her with adult secrets. This was about punishing adults who would exploit an elderly man's love for his family. This was about making sure that betrayal came with consequences. Ellen's voice echoed in my mind from our last conversation. I remembered her telling me to watch Harry carefully because weak people make dangerous choices when someone strong is whispering in their ear. Now I understood. Mary had been whispering for 3 years, and Harry had chosen greed over family loyalty at every turn. My phone rang suddenly, startling me from my thoughts, and Harry's name appeared on the caller ID. This time, I answered. I answered with deliberate weariness, as if the effort of reaching across my desk required a lot of energy. He told me he was worried sick about me leaving early yesterday. I now recognized the calculation in his voice. I let my voice trail off slightly, as if it was difficult to gather my thoughts. I told him I had been having terrible headaches and that it was hard to concentrate. He told me that didn't sound good and suggested that Mary and he could drive me to the clinic that afternoon. It was perfect. They were accelerating their timeline exactly as I had hoped. I told them that was very thoughtful and that I had been feeling so confused lately. He told me not to worry and that they would take care of everything. He told me they would be over in about an hour. After hanging up, I spent 30 minutes preparing for the performance of my life. I messed up my hair, put on an old cardigan that made me look frielier, and practiced the slower, more hesitant movements of genuine elderly confusion. When their car pulled into my driveway, I was ready. Mary announced that they had brought some papers that might help with my situation as they settled into my living room. She was holding a professional leather portfolio. Papers? I asked, blinking at her with what I hoped was genuine bewilderment. What kind of papers? Harry leaned forward, his expression earnest. Dad, we've been researching ways to help you manage things better. Your finances, medical decisions, that sort of thing. Manage? I'm not sure I understand. I rubbed my temples as if the conversation was causing physical pain. Everything seems so complicated these days. Mary opened the portfolio with practiced efficiency. These documents would give us power of attorney to help with your banking, bills, medical appointments. Think of it as having a backup system. The forms looked professionally prepared with highlighted sections marked for my signature. Someone had invested serious money in legal consultation for this theft. I stared at the papers as if they contained hieroglyphics. It's also overwhelming, I murmured. I used to understand these things better. That's exactly why we need to do this now, Mary pressed gently. Before things get more confusing for you. Harry shifted uncomfortably. Dad, are you sure you're okay? You seem really different today. I looked at him with what I hoped was confused gratitude. Different? I don't feel different. Just tired all the time. These headaches make it hard to think clearly. Mary and Harry exchanged a glance, the same coordinated communication I'd noticed at the party, but now I understood its purpose. They were evaluating whether I was impaired enough to sign documents without fully understanding their implications. Norman, these papers would just make it easier for us to help you, Mary continued. You wouldn't have to worry about managing everything alone. I suppose that would be nice, I said slowly, picking up one of the documents with trembling hands. But this is such a big decision. My head is pounding, trying to think it through. Of course, it's a big decision, Harry said quickly. Take your time. Mary's patience looked more strained, though. Don't you think it would be easier with family help? You trust us, don't you? Of course, I trust you. You're my family. I set the papers down carefully. But could I maybe sleep on it? Decide tomorrow when I'm thinking clearer? These headaches make everything so fuzzy. Harry and Mary looked at each other again, and I could see Mary's frustration barely contained beneath her caring facade. Sure, Dad. We'll come by tomorrow morning, and you can sign them then. After they left, I allowed myself to slump in my chair, dropping the performance for the first time in hours. The documents they'd left behind told the complete story. Power of attorney forms that would give them control over my finances, medical decisions, and living arrangements. Everything James had warned me about, laid out in legal language designed to steal my life. 3 hours later, I sat in my home office, reviewing my notes from Harry and Mary's visit, like a general planning a campaign. Their power of attorney documents lay spread across my desk, professional forms that would have given them complete control over my finances, medical decisions, and living arrangements. Every signature line highlighted in yellow, every witness requirement meticulously marked. They'd done their homework, but they'd forgotten I'd spent 40 years doing mine. Catherine Davis answered on the second ring. Norman, good evening. What can I do for you? Catherine, I need notary services tomorrow morning for some family financial documents. Could you come to my house around 10 o'clock? Of course. What type of documents are we dealing with? I chose my words carefully. Power of attorney forms. It might be a somewhat sensitive family matter, so I'd appreciate your professional discretion. You know, you can count on that. I'll bring my seal and journal. Perfect. Catherine had notarized dozens of contracts for my construction business over the years. She'd recognize irregular pressure tactics or coercion immediately. It was part of her professional training. Next call, James Miller. James, could you stop by tomorrow morning around 10 o'clock? I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I'd like to review my portfolio in detail. Certainly, Norman. After what we discussed about financial management assistance, I think a thorough review would be wise. Excellent. It might be educational. James chuckled. I'll bring the necessary paperwork. See you at 10. Educational indeed. James would witness whatever Harry and Mary planned to do, and as a bank vice president, he'd understand exactly what he was seeing. More importantly, his presence would add legal weight to any documentation of their behavior. Final call, Harry. I let my voice carry the tremulous uncertainty I'd performed that afternoon. Harry, I've been thinking about those papers you brought. You were right. I do need help managing things. Dad, that's wonderful. Mary will be so relieved. We can come over first thing tomorrow morning. I've arranged for a notary to make everything proper and legal. 10 o'clock sharp. Perfect. And Dad, thank you for trusting us with this. Trust. The word sat bitter in my mouth, but I managed to sound grateful. You're my family. Of course, I trust you. After hanging up, I walked to the window overlooking my backyard. Ellen's rose garden needed attention, another task I'd been managing alone since her death. Tomorrow would determine whether I'd continue managing it as a free man or watch it wither from some assisted living facility while Harry and Mary divided our life's work. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and wrote down the sequence of events I expected tomorrow. 9:45 a.m. Catherine arrives, sets up notary materials. 10 a.m. James arrives with portfolio documents. 10:05 a.m. Harry and Mary arrive expecting easy document signing. 10 a.m. Professional witnesses observe their manipulation tactics. 10:15 a.m. Truth emerges. The beautiful irony wasn't lost on me. They'd researched how to steal my independence through legal procedures, but they'd forgotten that legal procedures require proper witnesses and documentation. Tomorrow, those same requirements would expose their betrayal. 20 miles across town, Harry was probably explaining to Mary how cooperative I'd sounded, how the notary would make everything official, how close they were to controlling millions of dollars. They'd celebrate tonight, confident that a confused old man had finally accepted their help. They had no idea they were walking into a trap set by the same business mind that had built what they were trying to steal. I looked at Alexa's drawing on my refrigerator, our stick-figure family standing beside a crooked house. Tomorrow would determine whether that little girl grew up with grandparents who protected her or parents who taught her that family loyalty could be bought and sold. Ellen's voice echoed from 3 years ago. "Promise me you'll always take care of Alexa." I intended to keep that promise. Monday morning arrived gray and cold. I slept little that night, but when Catherine arrived at 9:45 with her notary seal and journal, I felt completely prepared. "Good morning, Norman." "Beautiful home office," she said, arranging her materials on the side table. "This should be straightforward." James knocked precisely at 10, carrying his banker's portfolio. "Morning, Norman. Ready for that portfolio review?" "More ready than you know," I replied, positioning myself behind my desk as footsteps approached the front door. Harry and Mary entered with confident smiles and their leather document case. They paused when they saw Catherine and James, but Mary recovered quickly. "How thoughtful of you to arrange professional assistance," she said smoothly. "This will make everything so much more official." "Indeed, it will," I replied, my voice carrying none of yesterday's confused frailty. "Please, everyone, take a seat." Harry settled into the chair across from my desk, still smiling. "Dad, you sound much better today. More like your old self." "Exactly like my old self. Sharp, observant, capable." I leaned forward, meeting his eyes directly. "Which is why I need to tell you something before we sign any documents." Mary's pen stopped moving across her checklist. "Norman, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong with me, Mary, but I'm completely aware of your plan." The silence stretched like a taut wire. Harry's smile faltered. "Dad, what plan? We're here to help you." "I know about your visit to James' bank last Tuesday. I know about the guardianship procedures you researched. I know about the mental competency evaluations you plan to arrange." Harry's face drained of color. Mary's carefully controlled expression cracked for just a moment before she attempted damage control. "Norman, you're confused. We visited the bank about our own financial planning." "James," I interrupted, turning to my friend. "Would you mind sharing what they discussed during their Tuesday afternoon appointment?" James cleared his throat professionally. "They asked detailed questions about conservatorship procedures, documentation requirements for declaring someone mentally incompetent, and expedited court processes for emergency financial management." Catherine looked up from her notary journal, suddenly alert. "Mr. Price, are you saying these power of attorney documents were prepared under false pretenses?" "I'm saying they planned to have me declared incompetent so they could steal everything I've worked 40 years to build." Harry found his voice, though it came out strangled. "Dad, we were worried about you. Yesterday you seemed so confused. Yesterday I was performing. Today you're seeing who I really am." I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the documentation I prepared. 247 transactions over 3 years, $70,000 in support payments, every mortgage payment, every car repair, every private school tuition bill, all documented. Mary leaned forward, desperation creeping into her voice. Those were legitimate family expenses. Conditioning payments, training me to say yes to increasingly larger amounts until I'd agreed to sign away my independence. I looked directly at her. "You researched exactly how to have me institutionalized while you divided my assets." Catherine set down her pen. "This is highly irregular. I need to understand the full situation before notarizing anything." "The full situation," I continued, "is that my son and daughter-in-law spent weeks researching legal procedures to steal my money, consulted with lawyers about guardianship processes, and planned to have me declared mentally incompetent based on fabricated evidence of confusion." Harry's hands shook as he gripped the armrests of his chair. We just thought you might need help managing things. Help managing a net worth of $2. 3 million plus 3 rental properties?" My voice hardened. "Help that required consulting attorneys about emergency conservatorship procedures." Mary stood abruptly. "You're twisting everything. We love you. Love doesn't involve conspiracy, Mary. Love doesn't involve researching how to steal someone's independence while they're still healthy and competent. James spoke quietly. Norman, the questions they asked were very specific. They knew legal terminology that most families never encounter unless they're planning something significant. Catherine nodded grimly. In my experience, legitimate family financial planning doesn't require research into mental competency evaluations. The room fell silent except for Harry's labored breathing. He looked at me with something approaching recognition, perhaps seeing for the first time the businessman who'd built the wealth they'd tried to steal. What happens now? He whispered. I stood, feeling every year of my age, but also every ounce of my accumulated wisdom and experience. Now we discuss consequences. Consequences? I repeated, opening my desk drawer to retrieve the legal documents I prepared over the weekend. I'm changing my will immediately. My estate will go into an educational trust for Alexa, accessible when she turns 21. Harry leaned forward desperately. Dad, please. We made mistakes, but we can fix this. The trust will provide for her college education, graduate school if she chooses, and startup funds for whatever career path she selects. I spread the new will documents across my desk. Catherine, I need these witnessed and notarized. Mary's voice cracked slightly. Norman, you can't do this to your own family. I'm protecting my family, I replied firmly. From parents who were willing to steal her grandfather's independence to fund their lifestyle. Catherine examined the documents professionally. Mr. Price, these terms are quite specific. There are conditions attached. If Harry and Mary formally renounce all claims to my estate and demonstrate genuine change over the next year, I'll reconsider, but they must prove they've become the parents Alexa deserves. James nodded approvingly as he witnessed my signature. The educational trust structure is excellent. She'll have every opportunity you never got to provide directly. Harry buried his face in his hands. What does genuine change mean? How do we prove that? By getting jobs that actually support your family instead of depending on me. By prioritizing Alexa's happiness over your own financial desires. By showing me that my granddaughter matters more to you than my bank account. Mary stood abruptly, her composure finally cracking completely. How are we supposed to live without your support? The same way millions of other families do. Through honest work and responsible spending, the mortgage assistance ends today. The car payments stop immediately. You're both adults with college degrees. Figure it out. Catherine finished notarizing the documents with practiced efficiency. Everything is legally binding now. Mr. Price, you should keep these in a secure location. My attorney will have copies by this afternoon, I assured her. After Catherine and James departed with handshakes and promises of discretion, the three of us sat in uncomfortable silence. Harry looked broken. Mary appeared to be calculating survival strategies. Is there anything else you want to say? I asked. Harry met my eyes for the first time since the revelation began. I'm sorry, Dad. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm genuinely sorry. Mary said nothing, which told me everything about her priorities. Words are cheap, Harry. Actions over the next year will determine whether this family has a future together. 3 hours later, Alexa knocked on my door, her school backpack still slung over her shoulder. Grandpa, Mommy said you wanted to see me? I knelt to her eye level, just as I had in the hallway 2 days ago. Come sit with me, sweetheart. We need to talk about some grown-up things. She settled beside me on the couch, her 8-year-old wisdom already sensing something serious. Is this about what I told you? Partly. Your mommy and daddy made some bad choices about money, and there have to be consequences, but none of this changes how much I love you. Are they in trouble? They have to learn to take better care of themselves than you. But Alexa, I want you to know that your future is completely safe. I've made special arrangements to make sure you can go to any college you want. Study anything that interests you. Her eyes brightened slightly. Even veterinary school? That's really expensive. Especially veterinary school. And if you change your mind and want to be an engineer or a teacher or start your own business, there will be money for that, too. What about Mommy and Daddy? They're going to work very hard to become better parents. And if they succeed, our family might be able to heal from this hurt. But even if they don't, you and I will always have each other. She hugged me tightly, and I felt Ellen's presence in that embrace. 3 generations of love continuing despite betrayal and broken trust. Can we look at college brochures? Alexa asked. I want to see what veterinary schools look like. Absolutely, I smiled, reaching for my laptop. We have all the time in the world to plan your future. Outside, spring was turning to summer, and Ellen's roses were finally beginning to bloom. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.